Welcome back to the Growing Band Director Podcast. This is episode number 298. I'm here with Principal Steve Nendza. Steve, how are you?
I'm doing great, Kyle. How about you?
Good, thanks. We were on earlier on an episode earlier this summer, and today we're meeting about interviewing. Being the best interviewer or interviewee that we can, specifically as a band director. So I guess a leading question: how did this start for you? You've presented this a couple times?
Yeah, it started with one of the local colleges here at Elmhurst College. And one of the guys that I worked with as a band director was teaching an undergrad class. And he knew I'd moved to the admin world. And he's like, hey, can you talk to our undergrads about how to interview and what principals look for? And it's kind of spiraled from there. I've done some things at the Illinois Music Education Conference, a couple other places. And just I think so many educators, especially when they're in their first part of their career, don't really have the skills sometimes to share what they know in a way that, the interview team is like, oh, this is the person we want because
Mm.
they've got really good ideas and they can convey those ideas.
That ability to interview well is definitely one that skipped me. I think if somebody came and just watched me teach, I would do well. But the whole interview is not, obviously for like a lot of people, not my happy place. Right. So,
Yeah, and I always had that wonder is like when someone's not a good interview, is like, are they a good teacher and just a really bad interviewer?
yeah.
And sometimes you never know.
So any tips on staying calm or as somebody who's done it so much?
Yeah, an idea I stole from a friend of mine named Justin Sissel. He was a choir director and now moved to administration. He's like, have a bottle of water with you. When you get to that question that's kind of hanging you up, take the water, give yourself a second to reset yourself, and then you can kind of move forward.
I think one of the greatest things they do is they put the questions in front of you when they ask them,
Oh, okay.
that's when I've been on committees and when I've been interviewed, that's like a huge help to keep you on because you get to answer to ask a question and it's just verbally. Well, give yourself 30 seconds to kind of talk, and then you're like, what's the question again?
You kind of meander and you're like,
Yeah. Yeah.
where am I at? What did I've actually in interviews, as I meandered, I said, can you repeat the question just so I make sure I get everything taken
Mhm.
care of? And to me, as a principal watching people interview, if I hear that kind of question, I don't mind because they're reflective and they want to make sure they do what they need to get done.
Excelsior Music Publishing is proud to sponsor the Growing Band Director podcast with a roster of imaginative composers, including composers who have been featured on this podcast, such as Carol Britton Chambers, Laura Estes, and Tyler Arcari. Excelsior Music Publishing provides new music for concert band, jazz ensemble, solo and ensemble, as well as books and resources for all levels and occasions, including a large and festive selection of music for your fall, holiday, and Christmas concerts. Find your perfect next piece at excelsiormusic.com. That's EXCELCIA music.com. You've heard me talk about the wonderful Tuner Caddy product. Now introducing the Tuner Caddy Tuner TCT 60M. Is a chromatic tuner that transposes for instruments in F, C, B flat, and E flat. Has a 6-foot clip-on microphone so they can tune from their seat, a built-in metronome to keep your tempos honest, and a bright, easy-to-read display so even the trumpet section can't miss it. Pair it with the Tuner Caddy, and you have the Tuner Caddy system, a place for everything and everything in its place. So, thinking especially as a principal, what are some things? I'm going to go a little out of order of what we kind of planned here. Things that you're looking for in somebody that's interviewing for a position, either as a band director or as in general at your school.
I think just in like kind of the big picture, I'm looking for someone who has lots of energy. They're excited to teach kids and they can give me things that are specific of how they would do things. Even if they're like young educator and they really haven't had a lot of classroom experience but they could talk like, this is how I would approach this. I watch my supervising teacher, I've read things on this. So I really would, that's how my big thing. If they're passionate, because I can't teach you passion as a principal, but if you come in on fire and you have an idea, man, we can run with it.
That makes me think of one of the reasons why I think I got the job that I have now is because when I came in, I had planned the program for the next year, and I gave
Hmm.
it to them and I put it on nice card stock or whatever. And they said, oh, this is nice. They didn't know any of the pieces, but it looked like, I didn't end up doing any of those because the band wasn't what I was expecting. But,
Hmm.
that forethought, I think, helped me a lot.
Yeah, having be able to be like some kind of vision is huge, especially in the music side of things. When we just recently interviewed for a band director at the middle school, and to hear the candidate talk about like this is what I would do, or this is what I think it should look like over time, like that's what we want. I mean, as a principal, I don't want to be the driving force on a music program. I want to see someone come in who wants to take it where it's at and just let it grow.
So, what are your honest thoughts on hiring somebody with experience versus less experience? And I'll tell you where I'm coming from. You
Okay.
probably know already, but like I've heard of school districts who are hiring band directors, and then they say if you don't have 10 years experience, don't apply. I've heard of that, and to me, like you can be good and young, and you can
Mhm.
be bad and experienced. Like there's obviously everything in between. So the nice thing about younger teachers is they're cheaper, right? Which is
From a
nice.
finance, yeah, I mean, we're looking, it's a dollars game as well too. How much money do we have that we can allocate to that? Um, but for me, it's someone, if you come in and you're young and you've got great ideas and you can convey how you would do it, how would you approach it, how you would communicate, you may be able to pass up someone who is, maybe has more years, but really doesn't have that passion or that excitement or that energy. I think in the beginning of our career, we kind of survive on the energy that we have.
Sometimes too, as you get older, it's like changing jobs. If you've been in a job for say 20, 25 years, changing jobs for a lot of people is much more complicated because you're talking
Yes.
about how it impacts your entire family, assuming you have a
Hmm.
family versus I'm 24 and looking for a job.
Right. Yeah. When you're young, you're like, well, if I got to move a half cross state, I can do that. But like you said, if you got a family and you're like, do I really want to uproot everybody? It's a big question.
What are some things that people can be doing right now to be a better interviewer when they decide to look for a job? I'm thinking mainly about college students who have not
Okay.
yet gotten into the profession, but also be considerate of people who are, teaching now.
Yeah, I think if you're looking kind of the angle of younger teachers, are you doing music camps? Are you helping out? Are you, coaching a sport at the, local park district? Are you working in a job that involves children? I'll look at someone if I see, oh, wait, they were a nanny or they worked summer camps or, music people, they taught private lessons. Um, Anybody who's done that really for me will rise up like, okay, I'm going to look at you. You've got some experience, even though you may not have had a full-time gig, but that's really what I'm looking for is someone who wants to do that. And then what was the other part? Someone like a veteran teacher?
Yeah.
I think a veteran teacher, at this point, they know their craft, but are they practicing their interview questions? Are they going online, find those questions? Are, just like as a musician, you're not practicing for the gig next week, you're practicing for the gig down the road. Are you able to really, when they say, tell me about yourself, can you talk for 2 to 3 minutes about what you've done? When they start asking you questions on classroom management, can you actually articulate what that would look like and how you're preventive in classroom management?
Today's episode is sponsored by the Thumb Gummy, a simple but powerful teaching aid designed for band students and their teachers. If you've ever taught beginners or even students a few years in who still struggle with their hand position, you know how much time can be lost with the same reminders over and over again. Thumb Gummy was created to fix that problem. It gives students a gentle guide for where their hands should go so they play more comfortably and with better technique. That means fewer bad habits, less frustration, and more progress in every rehearsal. Teachers tell us they spend less time correcting posture and more time actually teaching music. And students gain confidence because their instrument feels easier to play. Thumb Gummy is trusted by educators across the country and it's available for trumpet, trombone, clarinet, and more. To learn more or find a local music store that carries it, visit thumbgummy.com. My good friend Trent Austin started Austin Custom Brass so many years ago. You can call them at 816-410-0826. They ship all over the world. They have a shop in Kansas City, Missouri, and they really are an amazing sponsor of this podcast. They do trumpets, trombones, euphoniums, tubas, mouthpieces, and more, all the way from the beginner to the professional. Austin Custom Brass has worked with thousands of brass players from around the world. You can check them out on www.austincustombrass.biz. Whether you're a student, a band director, a parent, or a player, Austin Custom Brass is your place to go for all your brass playing needs. When I've tried to coach people through the process as well, one of the things I try to tell them is keep in mind you're interviewing them too. Like you
Right.
have a job, or maybe you don't need the job, or even if you do, you don't want to be somewhere it's not good for you. So you almost think of it, you're thinking in your mind, is this somewhere I want to be?
What's interesting too is I get people who come in and really have no questions at the end. And it kind of baffles me. And I'm like, wait, you're like you said, you're interviewing the school. Like, is this a good fit? So you shouldn't have questions that are like, what are the hours of my day? It should be like things that you can't find online, things that are not posted on their website. One of the things that I'm like, I don't want to hear is like, oh, I believe in your mission and vision, but you don't connect it to anything. It's like, well, that's nice to say, but if you could like speak on like, hey, I believe that, you talk about whole child education and your mission. Well, here's how I would approach that.
Well, some advice I might have too. I know we haven't even hit your presentation yet, but some
Oh yeah,
advice
you're
that
fine.
that I have for especially for college students, because I knew I was there and I think a lot of us were, is that never burn a bridge, especially with the adults that are helping you through that.
Yes.
The amount of times that you're like, all right, well, this is just my music theory teacher, screw them, they're dumb, like whatever,
Right.
and you maybe tell them off on the way out or whatever. But then you never know if they're going to know someone when you apply for a job. And then so you want good references, but beyond the references you supply, you want people to think well of you because word gets around and it can get you a job or not get you a job.
It does. Like when I look at an applicant and I'm looking, whether they're a new or old teacher, I'm looking for those names they have on there. And if I see someone that I know, I'm going to give them a call and be like, hey, Paul, is this guy that's listed on here? They taught in your district. What can you tell me about them? Or, if it's a former professor, I'm calling them like, hey, are they someone who I should look at, interviewing? But yeah, definitely, you start burning bridges because you think you're this almighty teacher and everyone else is wrong. You're going to find yourself that you're not getting calls, and it just could be because you're just not playing the game well.
And you never know where the connections are. It might not be a
Right.
physical reference that you have listed, but it might be, hey, 10 years ago you taught at this elementary school. Well, I know somebody who is a parent over there, like you can call whoever you want, right? If you're interviewing and you have a potential lead, you're allowed to call anybody to find it, even if they're not a reference.
100%. I've done that. I've looked at like, oh wait, I know this school. I know the principal who's there. This name's not listed, but I'll give them a shout out and be like, hey, tell me about this person. Is this, a good one or not? But yeah, definitely the people that you have either listed as references or the people that you don't even know that the other person knows. We actually had our choir director that we just hired for the middle school. She was actually one of the presentations that I did on interviewing. And, it's like when she came in, it was like, okay, well, you kind of know you didn't know that I was going to be here, but now you know that I know, you've heard how talk about interviews. So let's see what you can do. And she did a nice job.
Another thing I think a lot of people should be thinking about is their social media presence.
100%. Yeah. And I tell, candidates and like, you need to either, if you've got some sketchy stuff, you need to scrub it, get rid of it. Another one is like your email address. It shouldn't be like hotlip64 at, Gmail. We had one like that, and I was like, are you kidding me? Like, who does that? But I worry, like, if you don't have that common sense to like, take things out, will your social media stuff have things,
Yeah.
that are kind of, maybe it's not horrible, but, I'll be honest, parents Google the teachers.
Yeah.
And if you're doing some things on that things, they're going to bring it to the school, and that could be you start off in a really bad spot when it wasn't even intentional.
Well, anytime you're trying to look somebody up, the first thing you do is look them up on Facebook if they're of
Yeah.
the generation where they're on it. I mean, you can tell a lot from somebody about that.
When I have candidates, I will search them on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and also in TikTok to see if there's anything. And some people you can't find because they have their just like their first name and some altered last name, but hey, that's fine. But I want to make sure the person I'm hiring is going to be someone who's going to represent our school in a good way.
And people might say, "Well, I have free speech." It's like, yes, you have free speech, of course, but we're also free to not hire you. So,
Exactly. Yeah, I don't have to move you forward. I can be like, I don't. I just
yeah.
get a bad vibe, so I'm not going to move you into the next part of the game.
What are some general places that people can look for opening? Say they're starting to look.
Yeah, I think a good place is check out your state music association. I know in Illinois, the Illinois Music Education Association has a job board. I know that most counties, at least here in Illinois, the local, regional offices have a posting. K-12 job spots, another place that people are looking these days. And I think too, if you're a music teacher or you're in your undergrad, checking out with your music rep from the store that comes out and services, like they're going to sometimes know that things that are open before anybody else does.
Absolutely. You'll also find, I go back to social media. You also find, put a question out to people in that area. Say, I'm moving to Florida looking for a job as, in the Orlando area. What can you tell me? I mean, you'll get so much.
Right. Yeah. I mean, your group on Facebook or band director groups or any of the music teacher groups, like you put something out there and people are going to be like, hey, I know something's coming up. And, like you said, anywhere.
Yeah. As part of your presentation, you have section where you talk about helping them with the online portion of the application.
Mhm. The online portion is really important. I'm looking for a couple things. I'm looking for mistake free. That's like number one. If I start seeing spelling mistakes or like sentences that don't have, you know, capitals and periods, and you would think in, the day and age with Grammarly and spell check, but I still get lots of applications that have mistakes or that there's not a consistent formatting. Like, are you going to use dashes to separate things? Which, whatever. I mean, it's hard because it doesn't have a lot of functions, but are you taking the time to be exact? Because I look at it this way. If you're not taking the time to be exact on your application, are you going to be taking the time to be exact in your rehearsal planning and your concert productions? Will you, and it kind of, to me, it just says what's your level of, you know, expectation. Also, too, if you're using like Apple Track or Frontline, depending on what they're calling it now, if you go back in there and you update one or two things, it'll bump you back to the top of the queue for lists of where
Hmm.
you kind of fall. So even if you change a couple words in a paragraph, hit save and kicks you back up.
Yeah, you're really talking about attention to detail, which, if you're looking to
100%.
hire anybody, attention to detail is a big part of it. Oh yeah, that kid was absent today. I just marked them here. Like, well, that's a huge detail. Like you need to have attention.
Right. You can lose your job over like not taking attendance properly.
Yeah. Um, so same thing would go for cover letter, right?
Hmm.
Like, those are hard because you don't want them to be like, okay, say you see a cover letter that's 2 pages long. Like you're not going to read it.
No,
You
it should be
skim
like
it.
yeah, it should be some highlights. And I honestly, I kind of go back and forth each year. Like sometimes I'll start with the online application, as that's kind of my starting point, and then some years I kind of look at more of the resume cover letter part of it. So it's a whole package.
Have you ever hired a music teacher and then like the first thing you do is just go on YouTube and look for a recording of their band?
Let me think. I have not hired, well, the middle school person did, and we did not do that, but I know it's been done. And interesting, when we were hiring the band director, they said, hey, we went online and found the YouTube videos that when I was the director there.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's a great idea. I actually, one interview when I did for the previous job I had as a band director, I brought, obviously, I'm dating myself now. Here's a CD of one of our last concerts.
When we're talking resume,
Hmm.
what's the fancy word for that now? Never even learned the fancy word.
Vita, I think.
Yeah,
Uh,
whatever.
Resume, that works for me.
Yeah. So, like, I was always taught to go from most recent to the least recent as you do it. And like, what are types of things you put on it versus things you wouldn't put on it?
I think it depends a couple things where you're at in your career swing. Like if you're a new educator, you're obviously gonna, you'll start with your most recent college things and what ensembles you played in. I think it's important, like I talked earlier, like put on things that you've done that are, working with kids. If you can put things in there too that are not just like, oh, I was, drum major, I was, assistant to the director of bands for band office. But if you can actually like list things, accomplishments, or, if I was a private teacher, I had a 95% retention rate, over a student's time in my studio. Anything you can throw in kind of data kind of things, especially if you're a veteran teacher, like, hey, we had X number of, retention, or we raised over 10 years, so many thousands of dollars in grants or parent fundraisers.
One thing that baffles me, I've done some interviews recently, not for band director jobs, but for other jobs within our school, and I jump on it if it's something I feel like, I really care about who is hired. And some people, they'll ask questions to us or they'll talk like they haven't even looked at the school website. Like have an idea about the demographics of your school, have an idea
Yep.
about the community you're going into. Because when you're talking about, we had somebody coming in and they're talking like about an ice hockey team, about how important the ice hockey and what they would do with this and that. And you're like, we literally have 3 kids and they co-op with 2 other schools. Like we would love to have something, but we don't even like they're talking about this program like it's this huge thing, and they don't even know that we don't really have one.
Right. You've got to do your homework. I mean, and if you can speak on that, it's super impressive. I know when I got the job at Hilly, I called the library in town and I'm like, "Hey, can you tell me where this guy who's Hilly? Who is Jack Hilly?" And they took me a few minutes and they looked up and he was a former superintendent of schools. So I made sure to embed that into my interview. I've even had teachers tell me at interviews that, like, hey, I came and checked the community out a couple days ago. I drove through town and I really like what the school's like, and it seemed like a really nice place. I want to know someone who's like excited about to have that job and wherever that
Mm.
location is.
When it comes to dressing for the interview, I mean, I haven't done this in such a long time. Is it still like for guys like full shirt and tie and the whole thing, or is it like dress like you're a teacher, or sort of what is?
It's interesting. It's really kind of taken a downturn. And it saddens me because I want to see what your A game is. Like, what is your best look you're going to come? And that should be your interview look. Because if you come in all kind of like super casual, then I'm like, when we have a Friday dress down and you're just wearing jeans and, spirit wear, are you going to look really kind of disheveled? So I tell people like, you should, if you're guys, definitely suit. If you got, shirt and tie is like the minimum. If you've got a suit, great sport coat. Women, obviously, there's a whole swing of what's professional for women,
Mhm.
but it should be well put together. It should fit you well. I always tell people, find a friend who's honest and have them look at you and go like, yeah, that's a great look, or you know what, that's a look, but that look doesn't fit you well. My secretary when I was in Lamont one time said, like, did you see the guy's shoes? And I'm like, yeah, they were just a hot mess. Like you couldn't take the time to throw some shoe polish on. I just, to me, it's like those details. Like, how detailed will you be? Will you have a little pocket square that's a school color? Will your tie be a school color? Are you really trying to be the full package?
It's funny because especially college kids right now, like the people that they watch, the influencers, people on social media, they oftentimes don't dress up. I was just watching Thursday Night Football last night and like nobody was wearing a tie. It's one of those like the culture has changed at the same time, but you're still, I agree with you. I don't disagree, but I see why it might have been taking a downturn because a lot of people are just changing.
Right. And it's something that like, and I think you got to know your audience too. If you're interviewing a very conservative area, maybe that, if you have some nose rings or if you're, got lots of tattoos, I don't have a problem with those things, but if you're conservative town, you're like, maybe that's something you're not gonna, show your full colors at that point.
Yeah.
you know. But if you're in a more, liberal or, more town, it's like, then maybe it's a little better, but you've got to do your research.
So for people who have not interviewed, I'm just looking at the one here. It talks about the interview panel.
Mhm.
Typically, from my experience, tell me if you've done anything different. Either the principal or a lead person will come up with 10 questions. Sometimes the committee will submit questions and then someone like pairs it down and whatever. I assume that's done a lot of different ways. But basically there's a list of questions and then they go around and everybody on the interview will like ask the question. People need to know like that's not necessarily their question. Like they didn't come up with it. It's just
Right.
that's the one that they drew at that time.
Yep.
So when you get a question from somebody on your right, it's not necessarily that they care more. It's just that's the one they got assigned. But you really should be addressing the whole interview committee at that time. Have you heard about questions that maybe the interview committee wants to throw on there that you would maybe wouldn't have as a principal?
Not usually, because I usually kind of dictate for I kind of have a list of questions,
Mm-hmm.
and usually they kind of fit the whole bill for what we're doing. So I really haven't had, someone give me a question that doesn't really work for it. I did get a question one time that my first interview, the principal said, if you could have a billboard, what would be on it? And I was like, whoa. I mean, like,
Uh,
right. And for me, it was I felt like I did all right on it, but sometimes I want to ask that question. Sometimes I don't. I haven't used it very often, but you may get those kind of softball ones that are totally outside the box.
if you do a panel and there's say it's you and maybe one of the secretaries and maybe some of the teachers or something, like are
Mhm.
there questions or things that you hear them say, well, I'd really like to have somebody who's like fits this bill that maybe isn't what necessarily what you're looking for, but just a different perspective of a fellow teacher.
Yeah, when we have a panel, so generally the way we start off is I usually do the first round with the candidates. Sometimes I'll bring another administrator in, depending on how timing works out. And then once we kind of go through that screener interview, then I usually open to a panel. But it also depends on the timing. Like if we're like in the bottom of the ninth, it's like 2 weeks before school starts.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm just going to make that call. But I take the panel's input on it because I want to make sure that, if we're interviewing for, say, a third grade position, and I may have my team leader on it and maybe another third grade teacher, I want them to be able to like say, hey, would you think like it's going to be a good fit for our team?
Steve, you were talking a little bit about when we were off air about the mini interview when you're at an interview. What is that and why is it important?
So I think that mini interview is that when you're waiting in the office and you're that time you're like getting really nervous, you're anxious, and the secretary's there. So I think that's a really good opportunity to just be able to do small talk. Can you have a quick conversation with the secretary? Ask her or him like how long they've been there, you know, how they like the school. And because I've had secretaries after the interview tell me, oh, they were great to talk to. I really enjoyed having a nice conversation with them. Or I've had ones where they're like, they couldn't even have a conversation. And we want people who can communicate, especially if you're in the music position, like a lot of your job is communication. How can you talk to parents? Can you bring that all back in? And it's so important that you can have that stuff. My secretaries were always like, yeah, I like that person. So they kind of sometimes are also part of the process, even not officially.
One of my pieces of advice is going to go into something else that we wanted to talk about is I suggest when people go for an interview that they have notes in front of them for things that they're good at and specifically because even though it's an obvious thing, you and I could talk about it forever, and a friend, you could talk about it with a friend, but the minute you're asked formally, well, how can you tie in what you're really good at to the question that they're asking? So for example, say you really relate well to kids because you know their names quickly or like some detail like that, or you feel like you're a really good band director because you know literature really well because of like whatever. So coming in with a notes of like here's things I'd like to highlight about myself, because also when you're searching for what you're going to say, the minute you look down at some of your stuff, that's going to give you some thoughts as to how to maybe answer that question.
Yeah, if someone comes with notes like that, unless it's like 10 pages of notes, but like you got a
Yeah.
list of like, 10 things, I think that's great because you want to be able to talk about what you believe as a music teacher through those questions they ask you. And there's nothing wrong about, I kind of call it the politician spin. You can ask a politician what they want for dinner, and they're telling you why they believe that we should build a new bridge. Like, can you weave that in? Like, if you're really good at jazz improv, and they're asking you questions about, you know, curriculum, you can weave like, yeah, I believe that every kid should, have that creative side, and here's how I would, teach creativity. So really kind of weaving that inside it. I think that's a huge part of it.
Because some of your advice was be specific about how you would teach content with kids, like specifically how you would do it and say that in the interview.
Right. And I think don't worry about if your panel's a non-music team, but if you're throwing out, hey, if I'm teaching, if they're talking about say classroom management and you're like, well, we would do X, Y, and Z, but also I make sure that part of my managing the class is that there's a structure and they know how to open up their cases. And that would lead me to, how we teach instruments and our hand positions so that the kids are set up for success and they're successful and because they know how to form embouchure and their hand position, and now they actually play really well, so they want to behave well.
It's so funny because I'll just say for myself, so many of us feel comfortable in the band room with a band, with band kids playing music. Like that's like our place. Well, you take
Hmm.
us out of there, put us in the principal's office without the band kids, without the instruments, we feel out of place. So having that note, those notes and reminders of things can only help you in that process.
And actually, one thing that I didn't even realize until I started doing administrative interviews, there's a gentleman by the name of Justin Bader. He does a lot of principal PDs, and he talked about actually recording yourself, like with your phone and the video and audio, and have someone say the question and you talk about it, and then listen back to it. Like, does it make sense what I'm saying? Does it have a clear flow to it? Is there ticks in your voice? Do you say a lot of the ums or like or things like that we don't even know we have, but you start hearing it, you're like, oh, because we know as a musician, we record ourselves all the time. Like that's your best way to analyze it. But we don't ever do it in interviews, but it's such a powerful tool. And it's painful actually in a
I
way.
want
So,
people to know that when they pass something out to the interview committee, they ask questions. Yes, I'd like to show you this, whatever.
mhm.
That shows good preparation, but don't expect them to read all of it right then. Like you're just going to scan it, and that's the extent of it.
And I think it's a good thing too. If you're someone who brings in, say, a portfolio, if you can kind of weave that portfolio into your answers, if say that the question is like, hey, tell me what your repertoire would be for a winter concert for a middle school band. You're like, well, here's pieces that I've conducted, and this is what the program looks like, and here's actually how my rehearsal plan looks like, how I plan out from teaching start day one to day concert. That to me is like, whoa, this candidate's got it together. They know how they would approach it. Maybe it's not exactly how it goes. Like you said earlier on, I had my list that I would do, but it didn't end up being that. But it's better to have a plan and alter it than nothing.
So, from your perspective, if you're hiring somebody, they're coming in. Can you talk a little bit about how they're part of the school community and the teacher community, not just the teacher in their subject?
Yeah, I mean, when I want someone to come in for a music position or any position, I want them passionate about that lane. That's like number one. But if you come in and like, oh wait, you played softball in high school, cool, or you were on debate team, like, ooh, I may have three directors in the pool that look good, but now you can add to the whole school community. You can automatically move yourself up. And there's nothing wrong in an interview with saying like, hey, I really love softball. I played in high school. I played a little bit in college. I've coached it. And now that your principal and maybe the AP, who's also the athletic director, is going like, oh, wait, I got someone who can maybe even coach some sports or do more in the building. And then even talking about how you would like support your colleagues. I'm like, oh, I'm the band director, but you know what? When my choir teachers have a concert, I'll be there. I'll be helping, what do they need? Like, that's really powerful because we want someone who's going to support, the whole thing.
What are some of the most common interview issues that you encounter?
Interview issues. I think one, don't be late.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to be late,
Which
you
which
better be
means be, which
calling.
means be early.
Right, exactly. But I would say being early, 10 minutes is a good window of time to be early. I've had people come in like 20 minutes early, and it's really awkward because we're as a team, we're either debriefing from the previous one, or we may all be kind of running in from other things around the building. So 10 minutes is a good window. Even if you have to go wait in the parking lot for a little
Mm-hmm.
bit, come in, you know, maybe it's a good thing, ask where the restroom is, make sure you're looking okay. Other interview issues that I find where people they can't talk about themselves, they haven't prepared. Like interview questions are pretty much the same. You're going to get a classroom management question. You're going to get communication questions. You're going to get tell me about yourself and what you've done to get you to this point. You may get some curriculum questions. Um, you should be able to talk on that 2 to 3 minutes and have some specifics. It shouldn't be like the interview should not be done in 7 minutes, which I've had one. It was the weirdest thing in the world. I was like, okay, we're done. The other one, and it's an interesting thing, like at the end when they say, hey, do you have any questions? And then, the candidate asks the questions, the panel talks, and all of a sudden the candidate starts talking more about themselves. I'm always kind of like, well, you had a chance to tell me about yourself in the last half hour. This part now is where you're talking and you want to get our feedback. Now, if it becomes a dialogue kind of thing, that's different. But if it's just you as the candidate talking about yourself, I'm like, wait, you had your chance. Why are you now, coming up with all this stuff?
A couple things I'm thinking about. One, I don't know how if I'm going to say this right, but so you have questions at the end. Like if one of your questions clearly you've already answered, you've got three questions, and you look down, you're like, we've talked about this for a long time. It doesn't hurt to say, well, I was going to ask about whatever, but we've already covered it. Like that's a good thing to say.
Right, because to me it says like, hey, you've really like you're paying attention, you're in tune with this, you came prepared, and I'm like, that's great. I had one that one of my favorite responses that I got from a candidate in a question. We did mock interviews, and it was over Zoom, so it was back in those days, and not much. Sorry, it was a mock lesson. Back up, and afterwards, the candidate did a wonderful job. We liked her. And then we said, do you have any questions of us? She had a couple scripted ones. And then she said, what feedback do you have for me about my lesson? And I was like, whoa, let's hire her right now because either someone coached her to do that or someone was like, or she just has that, like, I want to be reflective. I want to learn to do better at this craft. And she was outstanding. She was outstanding to work with.
What are some other really good questions for the interview panel that you think of?
One that I love is, why do you like working here? It really kind of tells you about they want to know why this is a great place to work. I love hearing the one that is like, do you have any kind of advice for me as a young teacher to be successful in the school? Those are ones like, okay, they just want to know, how's this relationship going to look?
What if somebody asks a question that says basically a better worded way of saying when am I going to hear about a next round or not if I'm hired or not? Like that's a legitimate question to ask.
I think it is. We try to make that part of our interview process,
Right.
like at the end, like, okay, here's our next steps. But I think it's fair to ask. I think in this day and age, it's very competitive. There's not a lot of candidates out there. There used to be. It's okay to say, hey, can you tell me what our timeline looks like? And some just for people to know is some principals will, after they do the interview, they will call and say, hey, sorry, you didn't get the job. Some will email that you didn't get the job. Some won't even respond.
Mm-hmm.
I try to call everybody and let them know. For myself, I feel like if you took the time to come out to our school to interview and you just weren't the right fit for our thing, I feel like I owe to you to say, hey, Miss Smith, I want to let you know I appreciate you coming in. You will not be moving on to the next round. But honestly, I won't really give any kind of feedback
Yeah.
interview. I don't want to open the doors to any kind of issues.
What about if somebody says something like, say you're hiring for band director,
Mhm.
maybe you have a question for the panel that says, what are things from the program right now that you think as a school is really important that are kept, and what are things that you would like to see changed? Is that a fair question?
Fair question. I think it's a definitely because then you get an idea of like, okay, we really, at the football games, we did X, Y, and Z, or every year, the band went to a trip somewhere. And, then you can decide as director, like, hey, do I want to keep that going? Is that a place I want to be? I think those are valid questions to ask.
I just want to interrupt so I don't forget. There's a mentor of mine who applied for a job once and didn't get it. And he said afterwards, the feedback he said was, I told them what I was going to do when I got into that position. He said, I learned over the years to tell them what they want to hear. And then when I get the job and I'm there long enough to sort of morph it into what I want to do, but not necessarily tell them that right away because it scares them off if it's
Right.
too if it's too different.
It's interesting. A colleague of mine once said that when you start throwing the word out change, I would change this, I would change that. People get really nervous because, like, okay, our programs, especially if you've got an established program, like that gets kind of scary. One of the words that they used was talk about improving things. Like, I want to see our kids improve this. I know the band has performed at a really high level, and here's what I would do to take us to the next level to improve. And I think it's a challenge if you're going into a position where you're replacing someone who was beloved and they did a great job. That's a whole different kind of interview that you got to show that like I can take this thing where we're at and maintain and then push it forward. Or if I'm walking into where you walk in, you're like, whoa, this is an absolute train wreck. Well, how would I approach it to, maybe the community knows that it's not really good right now. What would I do to help build us up to that, mid-level and then what that looks like down the road? If you can speak on behalf of that, boy, you're gonna be able to hit a home run.
As someone who's been through this process a couple times when I was younger, sometimes if you're going to take over for someone who's really established and loved by the community, that might be a job you don't want to take because sometimes you're going to lose no matter what, you know?
Right. No matter, you could like walk on water kind of thing, and you could have had the best program in the world in your previous school, but you're never going to match up to Mr. and Mrs. So and so. And you can either accept it or go like, you know what, I'll wait till that person comes in, falls apart, and then they need a new person.
Yeah. I've been that new person twice, like the person after the person, and it worked.
Mhm.
It worked in both cases.
That's the best place to be.
Yeah.
I think, it's otherwise you're trying to you're always in their shadow.
Yeah. If it's a school that's had a tradition of excellence, but is not currently excellent, that's a great place to interview.
Right. Yeah. And I think too is, looking asking people around it, like where, like when I got to Hilly, it was in bad shape. And a friend of mine said, this is a gold mine. And it truly was. Like it was waiting to be harvested and
Yeah.
just, the people were ready for it.
Or I've told people in the past, they'll ask about a position. It's like, well, I'm not sure you want that job.
Yeah.
You can be honest with them.
Well, and two, I think if you're a young director, trying to walk into that established, say, high school marching program that's been going on for 20 years, they've been winning state championships and, doing really well at the big events, you've got to really know your stuff coming in. Otherwise, you'll get eaten alive and not even know you're getting eaten alive.
Yeah, because if you don't have marching band experience, but they need it, like you're not getting the job. You
Right.
could be great at everything. and give it
Right.
10 years, maybe you would learn it, but maybe you're so much better at jazz band and concert band and chamber music than the other person, but they don't know that.
Right. Yeah. It's always an interesting thing when you take over from someone who's just really did their job and was beloved. If they were there for a long time and really established traditions and just
Mhm.
a system to the program.
See, the last angle I wanted to really ask about before we left, first of all, it's a Friday and you're a principal and you're meeting. So I appreciate it very much. Is the whole angle of reading the room that as a teacher, I think you probably agree, the more and more you teach over the years, it's really, yes, you know the content and yes, you know the kids, but can you read where they're at right now? Can they handle more? Can they handle less? Like
Mhm.
to me, that's classroom management. That's teaching all the time. Like I have an idea what we're doing, but it might be longer or shorter depending on how they come into the room or whatever. um, you can show that in your interview questions in your interview as you're interviewing. So for me, one of my pet peeves is if you ask a question and the person just talks and talks and talks and you're talking 10 minutes per question and they're just still talking and everybody's like completely checked out because maybe you're nervous and you're rambling, but if they're checked out, you're not reading the room if you're still talking.
Yeah, and I think that's a real important, like why you have to practice the questions. Like, can you 2 to 3 minutes on a question is really a good amount for the panel to kind of get your ideas. If you're going past that, you're probably boring them, and they're going to be like, is this person going to just talk a lot in rehearsal?
Mm-hmm.
Are they going to be able to realize, oh, my kids are checked out because I'm just like yapping away for an hour? And some panels, they will just kind of look at you and smile, and they'll give you no like negative feedback because they're just those kind of super nice people. But like you've got to prep. And I think that's a big part of it. If you're going on 5 to 7 minutes on an answer, man, you need to like whoosh, bring it in.
And remember, every person on this committee is not getting paid, right, for being on a committee, right? Do they pay anywhere?
Generally, it depends when it's happening and all that. Sometimes we have, sometimes we don't. But you know, you got to, like I said, do read the room and
Yeah.
be aware, like how much you're talking or not
and
talking.
and these people, like if you're the last interview, a lot of these people are picking up their kids at daycare or they're about, you know what I mean, like these people on the interview committee have lives.
Yeah,
So if anything, if you can get your answers in and be on the shorter side while still effective,
right.
I'm not saying cheapen the answer, but definitely the more you go on and on, not only are you not reading the room, but you're not like respecting their time as humans.
And you're probably not saying anything more profound that you could have like tightened it up with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Steve, I think we covered it. Thank you so much for the time once again.
I appreciate it. It's great to talk to you and, just kind of shoot the band director talk. And, I love listening to your podcast. So keep up the awesome work.
Thank you. Are you if people want to reach out to you and connect more on this, like one on one, what's the easiest way to reach out to you?
Probably best just in my email. If you want to put that in the comments, that would be great.
Sure. I'll put it in the
You
show
can also
notes.
search me on Facebook, Steve Nendza. I used to be more on Twitter, but we've kind of changed some platforms here at school, so not as much, but definitely on Facebook and email. Yeah, I'd be happy to help out. If someone wants to like, bounce and do like a mock interview via Zoom or anything, I'd be happy to help you out.
We sincerely appreciate you taking your valuable time and listening to the Growing Band Director podcast. Your students are very lucky to have a band director like you. If you have any suggestions for episode topics or think you have an area of expertise to share on a show with us, please reach out. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your band director friends to subscribe as well. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening to The Growing Band Director. See you next week.